I really want to thank anyone listening to this video. I've been asked so many times what is asynchronous debate that I feel really proud that I put together kind of the most comprehensive video of the technique that I am trying to create through instruction. I've been interested in asynchronous debate for about 5 years now, and whenever I tell people what I'm doing and how I carry out and execute these different tasks, they always seem so interested and amazed, and that keeps motivating me forward. Asynchronous debate is supposed to be something that solves problems in the debate classroom, but it also creates certain problems. One of the first problems is what to name these solutions. For the purposes of this video, I want to focus in on a tool that I call the Video Manager for Asynchronous Debate. I don't know, maybe there's an acronym in there or something. In order to explain asynchronous debate, it is kind of necessary to explain a traditional classroom. A typical semester is 12 to 16 weeks, and in a normal classroom setting, like for math or biology or most other subjects, most of that time is taken up for lecture. The same is true for argumentation and debate, but there needs to be time that is set aside for debates themselves, because that is the time that people can meet in order to have those debates, and the instructor can't grade those things as homework. The problem with that is if you make students wait until week 13 or 14 in order to practice the stuff that you are teaching them, the information that they need to complete the assignment was covered more than 8 or 10 weeks ago. Because debate has to be taught in order, usually you start with how to debate one side, the affirmative, and then move over to how to debate the other side, the negative. And then that means that those students are referencing different lessons in the class period. A second thing you need to know about traditional debate instruction is how traditional debates are set up in the first place. There's lots of different ways, but I'm going to focus on the one-on-one format, otherwise known as Lincoln Douglas. In this format, there are just 2 students, and the first student to go is the person who gives the first affirmative constructive, also known as the 1AC, for 6 minutes. And then it is followed by a first cross-examination, or 1CX, for 3 minutes. Next, there is the first negative constructive for 7 minutes, followed by the second cross-examination for 3, the first affirmative rebuttal for 6, first negative rebuttal for 6, and the second affirmative rebuttal is the last speech and 3 minutes long. All added together, that makes 34 minutes. The average class meets for maybe about an hour and a half. So at best, you could get in 3 debates in one class period. Teachers tend to shave off the time requirements in order to make it fit inside the confines of a class meeting, but all that does is reduce the amount of speaking time for each individual student, and therefore decreasing learning opportunities. If you imagine each one of these speeches as its own separate video, you've basically got the idea of asynchronous debate. What happens is each video now becomes a permanent reference for what people said, and the next speech can come out weeks later after students have had the opportunity to research their opponents as well as their responses. Not only does asynchronous debate give more speaking time per student, but they also speak more often and therefore are practicing more. Instead of waiting till week 13, they're speaking in week 4. And it's not just one person on the affirmative and the other on the negative. Both of them are on the affirmative. That also means that they can reference the material that they covered just last week or the week before. Effectively, this means that they are debating both sides at once, participating in 2 debates at the same time. Unfortunately, asynchronous debate doesn't just happen. There are some problems that emerge from trying to implement this technique. First, the videos need to be managed into playlists, and that means that typical assignments through learning management systems really aren't compatible. Usually assignments are treated as one-off. You just give some sort of writing prompt and then they turn in an essay. But this is more like a project that goes on for several weeks and needs to have multiple submission points. The second problem is that students drop out, or sometimes they just don't turn in assignments. For a normal course, this isn't that big a deal. They just get a 0. But in debate, since they have an opponent or a partner, that means other people are depending on them for their submissions. In essence, you need to make it so that students can have 2 complete debates regardless of what their other students may or may not do. I've always been kind of a do-it-yourselfer by nature, so I decided to just manage all of these problems by hand for all of the courses that I teach at the community college. While the workload is fairly manageable, it does become a bit daunting, especially since I'm convinced that there are technology solutions to this problem. Regardless, I'm just going to show you how I do this by hand, and then hopefully there might be different processes that I can do that are more efficient, or maybe application or plugin ideas might come to mind. So the first thing that I do when I have a new argumentation and debate course is that I get the roster several days ahead of time and I make a bunch of YouTube playlists. These playlists are where I'm going to eventually manage every single video that is submitted by my students, so I've developed a naming technique that helps me look things up or submit things really quickly. It's really in 3 parts. The first one is just the section number for the course as a whole. All universities and higher education institutions will have something like this. Secondly, I give the debate itself its own unique ID for the course. So for instance, in this example, this is the 28th debate in the course, and the last thing I have is the student's name. This makes it so I can submit their videos really easily. When I'm in YouTube, I can just look up their name when I'm submitting the video to a particular playlist. The next thing I have to do in an asynchronous debate class is I have to go to the learning management system and set up groups. The LMS I use is Blackboard. Here is a view of the groups as the student should be able to see them. I've been trying to make it so that they can just directly submit their videos to the playlist itself. So this link right here actually grants them access to the playlist itself. Unfortunately, people have real problems using that and don't know how to set it up properly, so it has not been entirely successful. For each of the groups, I have to go through and I have to embed the entire playlist, and I have to add group members. This also means, though, that if I want to pair people up to see each other's videos, I either have to change the entire embedded playlist for their own individual group, or I have to go through and add them to the group that I want them to see. This means, though, that I have to go through every single group anytime I want to add or remove someone from a debate. And while doing that for one person only takes a couple of minutes, when you have 3 sections and each section has 25 students in it, you're looking at several hours worth of work anytime you want to adjust the pairings for debate. I try to complete both of those tasks before the semester starts. But once the semester starts, it's time to move on to stage 3, which is putting students into groups. I found that this simple step solves a lot of problems and not just the asynchronous debate management. Trust me, it pays dividends in the end. The way that I make sure that people get into groups is first I present them with the resolution that they will be debating all year long. For example, this last year we were debating about the United States Southern Command in Latin America. It's a branch of the military whose area of operation is anything south of Mexico all the way to the southern tip of South America. That includes the Caribbean islands, but let's not get bogged down in that. The point is, I use the resolution to group them into 3 or 4 groups. In this case, I came up with 3 groups. The groups are divided based on the different types of cases that they can argue for. All of these cases are some form of reduction of U.S. Southern Command in Latin America. They're just kind of different versions of it. So I allow students to research each one of them and make an informed decision. I do kind of regulate how many people are in each group. Once these students come into class, they can work in these study groups. Eventually, it becomes time for them to record. All of them record as a group, with each individual student generating one recording. They submit those videos to Blackboard through an assignment, and I take those assignments and I move on to the next step, pairing. When pairing up debate opponents, I follow a certain pedagogy where I want people to have the greatest breadth of knowledge possible. So I make sure that they are opposing someone with a case that is different than their own. So they're not responding or negating the own case that they already researched. They have to now research opposition to a completely different case. This is where I have to add people to the groups in the learning management system. If you see, I have the same sort of titles for each of the groups, the debate numbers, in this example that I did in the class that I showed you earlier. So the way you can think of it is that in this example, I went through and 16 times had to manually add somebody into the group by searching through a roster, finding their name, and making sure that they are added to the right debate number. I need to do the pairings very quickly because that is how students know who their opponents are so they can move on to the next stage, cross-examination. In order to have remote cross-examinations, I have an instructional video on how to set up a Hangouts on air so the students can record their interview or cross-examination with their opponent and submit it to YouTube really easily. They also have the option of just meeting up and holding up a camera that has both of them in the frame and doing the cross-examination that way. Remember, cross-examination is just one side asking questions and the other side answering questions, kind of like a lawyer with a defendant on the stand. This stage really confuses a lot of students because asynchronous debate makes it so that every single person is debating two debates simultaneously. So for cross-examination, each student will have to ask questions of somebody, and in a different video, they will have to answer questions for somebody. These two different videos really confuses people also because usually they're part of two groups simultaneously and they don't know which one is their affirmative and which one is their negative, regardless of how many times I tell them which one is which. The other problem that arises during this stage has a pretty easy solution. Sometimes one student is just unavailable to the other student. They're not very good with their attendance, or they can't make the technology work. Regardless of the reason, sometimes there is a video that doesn't get made. The simple solution is that the student who's being responsible notifies the instructor about the situation. They get exempted from the assignment, whereas the student that is being irresponsible gets deductions. Even though one person does miss out on the experience of cross-examination, usually they have their other opponent where they can have that experience. Remember, in the end, they're going to have 4 cross-examination videos that they're going to have to participate in. After cross-examination, all the students now need to switch into negation mode. They are now researching opposition to a particular case, working in groups with students that are opposing the same case as they are. In very much the same way on the affirmative, they're going to come in on one day and each give their negation speech and submit it through Blackboard. This brings up the next step of the video management system, and I call it the first repair. What happens is that sometimes students either drop out or they just don't submit their negative video. One part of this is easy. That student gets deducted the points for that submission. But the problem is that their opponent now doesn't have a video to respond to. And so there needs to be a way for students to always have a complete debate in which they can add the next level of the debate. The solution that I have come up with is that If someone doesn't submit their 1NC, the first negative constructive, I make sure to take an affirmative from the same case from another playlist and basically have that student watch it and then provide the next response. So in this case, debate 15 has lost his opponent, and so I'm looking to debate 3 because, as you can see by the color code, they are the same affirmative case. That means if debater 15 watches those 3 videos, he should be able to generate the next speech in that debate as if he were the one giving the speech in the first place. This does mean that a student doesn't get to defend his or her original arguments from the first affirmative, but it really is a small price to pay considering that the case is exactly the same, and that student worked very closely with the other student in groups to generate a very similar case. So ultimately, the debates don't vary as much as people think. The point is to keep the class progressing forward so that everyone can continue to submit the same types of videos at the same time, relying on the same information that was given out during the lectures or video lessons. After the negative constructive, there is a second cross-examination. But we already have the system in place to deal with any student that doesn't participate in a cross-examination. If they don't submit, a notification is sent to the instructor and the points are doled out accordingly. After the second cross-examination, the first affirmative rebuttal is the next speech. Same thing. If a student doesn't submit the first affirmative rebuttal, their opponent is granted access to the playlist with the same affirmative case that they started with. Usually I like to choose the best debate so they have plenty of material to work off of. You continue on repairing the debates until you are done with the last rebuttal. As you can see, each one of these debates looks very similar to the traditional debate that you saw earlier in this video, just with a little bit more color. I've made this work for about 3 years now, and I'm struggling with a more efficient and automatic solution. I really think I've been making a lot of progress in the last few weeks. So I'm really excited that people are watching this video, and hopefully with our combined efforts we can find a creative solution.